Hi, welcome to another episode of Unordained. This is a podcast where I, as a former born-again Christian and pastor who's now an atheist, have conversations with people who've gone through the same thing and people who are familiar with religious trauma and fundamentalism and pretty much anything to do with deconstruction from religion and deconversion. And so my guest today, I am very thrilled to have her here. She is the founder of Divorcing Religion. She is a registered professional counselor, and she specializes in religious trauma. She's also a religious trauma consultant and a fellow Canadian. So, I mean, you can't get much better than that. So, please help me welcome Janice Selbie. I'm just thrilled to have you here because I can relate so much to your story. I mean, I thought I was in deep, but sister, I didn't wear a bonnet.
Yeah. Oh, and I proudly wore that bonnet. Yes, I
Oh,
did.
I bet. Could you please start by just kind of talking about your background a little bit? Yeah.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about
Yeah, tell me.
that. Sure, I live in British Columbia, and I was born and raised here in the Okanagan Valley. So, there were about 60,000 people in my hometown, and my parents were Pentecostal. And so I was raised in that tradition. And so speaking in tongues, laying hands on for healing, anointing with oil was very normal in my house and
Yep.
in my life. But my dad is pretty unhealthy individual, diagnosed narcissist. And when you combine that with
Wow.
fundamentalist belief systems, it makes for a volatile home environment. So
Yeah.
I became quite comfortable with rules and rule following when I was a kid, my siblings and I, because our dad was so volatile. Our mom was very gentle. Mom represented everything loving about religion, Christianity
Right.
in particular, and dad represented everything else. The rules and regulations, my way or the highway.
Yeah, that's very much a fundamentalist view, isn't
Yeah.
it? That the man
Mhm.
is the head of the household,
Yeah, no
and
matter how unhealthy he may be.
oh,
That's right.
absolutely, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah. It's I wasn't born into it, which I believe you were.
Mm-hmm.
My husband was. He was born into a Pentecostal family. I kind of got into it much later. I was 28 when I got involved, but I was also Pentecostal and speaking in tongues. Hey, so can you still speak in tongues, Janice? I won't ask
But
you to do it, but I bet you
yeah,
can.
that's oh boy. And that
Yeah.
one took me a long time to wrap my mind around after I left, because in those times when I did speak in tongues, I felt really close to God. Like I felt
Yes.
like I was truly communicating. But I'm
Yeah.
getting ahead of myself.
No,
I'll,
no,
I'll
no,
just
not at
carry
all.
on with the story. So that was kind of a backdrop to my home life. And then actually when I was 4 years old, my sister, who is First Nations, she was unfortunately a victim of the 60s scoop. And
Oh,
so she's Indigenous, and as was happening in the 60s and 70s, the police and social workers and government and churches were basically raiding the reserves and taking the children away and placing them in white evangelical homes. And
yeah.
so we were a white evangelical family. And so I was only 4 years old. I had no idea. I just thought, this is how sisters show up at your house. They show up with a suitcase. She was
Oh,
7 years old. And so then we weren't just 3 kids, then we were 4 kids. And my parents, she stayed with us. They gave her our name, and she grew up with us. And I never really thought about it, which is kind of embarrassing to say. I didn't think about it till I was in my 40s. But so we grew up that way. All my siblings in their teens pretty much walked away from church. They had no interest in it, but I was the youngest, and I saw how much it pained my parents when my siblings walked away. And I was like, I'm never going to hurt our parents that way. So I really doubled down in a sense. And then in my late teens, did some backsliding, checked out the world, joined a rock band,
Did
these
you?
sorts of things, as one does.
You
Yes.
went from a rock band to a bonnet? Is that what you're saying to me?
That's pretty much it. And
Oh, that's so cool.
yeah, so I sowed some worldly oats there, moved to the big city, which of course is Vancouver, and then had a back to Jesus moment when I was in Vancouver. Because the whole time I was sowing my worldly oats, I felt really a lot of guilt, tremendous guilt, and always like, I shouldn't be doing this. This is so wrong. I know what I should be doing, and I'm not doing it. So then I had my big back to Jesus moment in my early 20s, and really did go back to Jesus in a hardcore way, and reclaimed my virginity, and was like, I'm never gonna, the next man, the only man I'm gonna have sex with again, it's gonna be my husband. And so sure enough, I moved back to hometown, started going to the church that I grew up in. My pastor set me up on a date with a guy that he thought would be great for me. Of course, the only thing we had in common was we were both pretty much religious fanatics at that point. And sure enough, we got married and moved away to Alberta because he wanted to become a pastor. So we moved to Three Hills, where there's Prairie Bible Institute, and that's a conservative Bible college.
Yeah.
And I stayed home with the children, started homeschooling. We had 2 little girls, and he attended classes. And then I would see these women come into the grocery store in the town, and were always dressed very modestly, conservatively, and they always had their hair up and covered. And I was saying to my husband at the time, he's no longer my husband, but I was saying to him, what's going on with these people? Like, I didn't think we had Amish in this neck of the woods. And he said, no, they're not Amish. They're some kind of Mennonite. And I was saying, well, why are they covering their heads? And he said, it's in the Bible. So I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I never got to that part yet. So sure enough, went to the Bible college library and got out the lexicons and concordances and all the things that you need to rightly divine the word of God.
Yeah.
And then I saw, sure enough, in Corinthians there, and Paul's talking about how women are supposed to behave and supposed to dress, and they're supposed to, have their hair covered whenever they're praying, but also we're always supposed to be in an attitude of prayer. So I thought, why are these the only women who are doing this? Because remember, I told you I love rules, big fan of rules.
Yeah.
So I asked my husband for permission. Do you mind if I start doing this? Because I actually think that women should be doing this. And he's like, yeah, okay, knock yourself out if you want to do it. And to me, so then I was being obedient to scripture, obedient to God. And I felt that it would also serve as a reminder for me to be obedient to my husband, which I sometimes found challenging because I didn't think that he always made the right decisions and choices. And I would tell him that. And so I thought our marriage was a challenge. As I said, we didn't really have anything in common other than our religion. And so our marriage was hard. And I thought, if I wear this head covering, it'll be a visible reminder to me at all times to try and shut my pie hole. And didn't work apparently, but I tried.
Quiet. The hat didn't keep you quiet. Is that what you're saying? You should have put it right over here.
That's right. Should have come with duct tape. That's it. Oh dear. Yeah. So then I started wearing my covering, and then my little girls, of course, like I never cut their hair, and they had to only be wearing skirts and dresses all the time. Although I did make exception for snow pants because we're in Alberta, for Pete's sake. So in the winter time, if they're playing outside, they're tucking their dress into their snow pants.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good time.
You can't be Canadian without snow pants and a toque.
and probably a hockey stick, but I digress. So that's how that went. And it was people on the college campus, I think, really thought I lost my mind, because certainly there was no other females on the campus who were wearing head coverings. And at that same time, I got rid of all my pants and shorts and jewelry and everything. And so I just would go to Value Village, go to a thrift store and just get all dresses and jumpers and whatever else. And of course, by this time I was in the homeschool community because I was homeschooling our daughters. Well, it was absolutely like normal in that group to be freaky for your faith.
Yeah.
And they thought we were weird because we only had 2 children. Like, they would pray for us that, open your womb, like, how do you only have 2? The next closest family had 6.
Yeah.
And I remember I begged my husband at one point, I'm like, please get a reversal on your vasectomy, please. And he's like, are you crazy? No one's touching my junk ever again. That's not going to happen. Forget it. So, and now I'm like, whew, thank goodness we did not go that route. But it was so,
there's a lot of
so wrapped up in it.
A lot of fundamentalists are also part of the quiverful.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And the only place for a woman is in the home, and her only job is to pop out babies and train those babies to be obedient to Christ and obedient to their husband if they're female. And so that wasn't necessarily something my own parents put on me. Certainly wasn't something that my husband put on me. It was, I think, partly my reaction to coming out of an unstable growing up environment and childhood environment with a volatile, overly religious father. And so I'm always searching for rules and tell me what to do, so I don't have to try and think and figure it out for myself. If I know the rules, I can just obey and be safe.
And you also, I imagine, like me, you wanted to be the best Christian that you could be. You wanted to follow the Bible as closely as possible. So when you see things like, that a woman, you should not be just with, the outward adorning and stuff. So you throw away your jewelry and makeup and that kind of stuff.
Oh, let me tell you, it got much worse than that. I mean, I also came across coverings that said, no one's to shave. Men aren't to shave, women aren't to shave. So nothing got shaved, not my pits, not my legs, nothing got shaved. So I don't know how my husband could even stand. It was, I was like, really, okay, if I'm gonna do this, I'm all in. And that also, we interpret or misinterpret religion and everything else through the lens of our personality as well. And I very much tend to be a person of extremes. I'm all the way over here. I'm all the way over here. I'm searching for that elusive middle. And it's really hard for me to find sometimes that middle ground. Whereas my husband was like a totally middle of the road, very chill fellow, not given to extremes. And
so do you think that being, one extreme or the other kind of a person, do you think that was born out of your fundamentalist upbringing? I kind of feel the same way, but I wasn't raised like it. But I do feel like anything I do, if I'm behind it, I'm fully behind it,
It's so hard to say that nature versus nurture thing. I look at my dad, whom I don't have a good relationship with, and he is absolutely that way. And I hate when I am like him. I hate it when and my brothers and my siblings and we will tease each other about it. If one of us, has a hissy or whatever, and we're like, oh, guess what? I think dad just came out of you a little bit. So I don't know if it's just, that my personality was always that way. I do think that I was partly molded that way, at least in childhood. And so husband ended up taking a job then in Saskatchewan, in a tiny town in Saskatchewan. Now, I had never really been out of BC to speak of until we moved to Alberta, and we moved to like this small town of 2,000 people in Alberta. And then he's like, you think that's small?
Yeah,
Wait
that's
till you see
nothing.
where we're going. We get to this place, is like 800 people in the whole town. I'm like, are you
Oh,
freaking kidding me? He was not. So, so we started at that church, and it was horrible. Even when he told me, so the idea when we went to the Bible college was that he wanted to become a professor. He wanted to be a theology professor, which I thought would be great because he'd be well suited to that. Not well suited to pastoring at all, not a shepherd in any way. Actually, very likely is on the spectrum. So not
okay.
interpersonal relationships pretty difficult. And when he said he thought he was to be pastoring, I was like, oh no, yeah, I think you may have your wires crossed. And I'm trying to say it as gently and politely and submissively as possible. You are about to make the biggest effing mistake that you're dragging our family into, and it's going to be horrible. And it didn't matter what I said because I was the woman. So
Yeah.
that's what we did. And we got out there, and it was, all of my nightmares came true. And I spent the entire time putting out fires in the congregation because due to his lack of interpersonal, it just wasn't great. So he thought he was having a great time. He's like, that was the best year of my life because he got to shut himself away and do nothing but write sermons and this sort of thing, but literally shut himself away, lock himself in the church. People are pounding on the church door trying to get in. I'm saying, you can't lock the door. People have to be able to get in. So it was quite a difficult year. And then, so we'd only been there a little while when he said to me that he wanted me to stop wearing my head covering, which was super hard for me because I thought I was doing it as an act of obedience. And he said, it's just creating a barrier between you and the other women in the community and in the church for you to be covering. So that was heartbreaking for me, but obviously I, wanted to be submissive and obedient to my husband, trying to be a good Christian wife. So I did. And then there were just numerous other things that went on in the course of probably a span of about 2 years. And so my folks separated after 43 years together. My mom finally got up the courage and did what we thought she should have done ages ago. But it was it was shocking, and it was hard for us to come to terms with. And then there were all the issues going on in the church, like we were not a good fit for that congregation. And then my nephew actually was a Pentecostal church.
It was a Pentecostal. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Called New Life, of course, because every Pentecostal church called New Life.
That was Janice, that was the name of the church I pastored.
Of course it was. Of course it was. And then so problems with the church and problems with my parents. And then and we were both really struggling with depression. And then I had a call from my mom who said that my youngest nephew actually had killed somebody and the police were after him, and they were worried that he might head out our way to Saskatchewan. And so I had to be prepared if he showed up to go to the RCMP. And so it was just like one terrible thing after another. And then on top of, much of it, our youngest daughter was diagnosed with a life-threatening illness. And then we went bankrupt trying to deal with that. So it was a real series of tragedies without enough time in between even to catch our breath. And we moved back to Kelowna.
And how did that affect your faith at the time?
That was absolutely the catalyst. That was
was it?
Yeah, really just like pulling on that string on the sweater, pulling on that thread, and the whole thing is starting to unravel.
Right.
And so I would say, while we were married and living at the Bible college, there were other littler things that had happened that were making me feel maybe uncomfortable about the religion, like particularly the man having all the power in the relationship dynamic. And of course, then things about homosexuality and just Or how about Abraham being ready to sacrifice his child? I did, or Lot offering his daughters to the, the gang
Yeah.
of people.
Yeah.
I never was able to really cope with those things or make them fit in.
Right.
Um, but so then when all these tragedies happened on a personal level,
Mm.
that was just it. I figured, okay, I bet on the wrong horse.
Mm.
It's not working. I didn't know anyone who had tried as hard as I had to live
Yep.
a life that was obedient, and it was
Yeah.
just a shitstorm raining down on us everywhere.
Yeah.
So then I thought, okay, I have to start looking elsewhere, because I was still sure at that point that there was a God, but that I must have somehow misinterpreted, or I chose
Yeah.
the wrong
Yeah.
religion.
Yeah.
And I wasn't able to talk with my husband about it. Wasn't really able to talk to anybody about it, because it's very much a matter of, you just don't have enough faith. You just need to
Yep.
pray more.
Yeah.
God can heal your daughter. God can give your daughter a new pancreas. I'm like,
Yeah.
that is
Mhm.
not going to happen. Why would we have amputees walking around if God actually could do that? Why are there handicapped stalls at a church parking lot
Yeah.
if God can actually
Yeah.
do that?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I started exploring, going to bookstores, and yeah, but very gingerly, very carefully, and fraught with trepidation. I was
Oh, I
so
bet.
scared. What if I'm doing the wrong thing? Like, I could handle, if I'm wrong and I go to hell, that's one thing, but I can't. What if my children follow in my footsteps and they go to hell because
Mm.
of my mistakes? So I had to grapple with all those things. Is
Oh,
hell
yeah.
even real? And what am I doing? And how
Yeah.
is this going to impact the family dynamic? And the marriage was, continuing
Yeah.
to unravel at that point. We hung on for a few more years after that, maybe another 5 or 6 years after that.
Mm.
And then, so eventually I left Christianity altogether, dove right into New Age philosophies
Oh,
and
okay.
Eastern, and grew my dreadlocks and got my own tattoos, and I can align your chakras, like I said, go from one extreme to the other. And it was so liberating to me, because these were things that had been forbidden when I was a Christian. And now, I can find out about all this stuff. I can put my fingers in all these pies. It was very exciting. I'm
Yeah.
sure my children got whiplash, like, what's going on?
Yeah.
So we went from having an overabundance of rules to having no rules. There are no
Yeah.
rules. You can
And
do
how
what
old
you
were your
want.
kids then at that time?
Teens.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right.
And I think my husband also was fairly shocked by everything that was going on. He wasn't even attending church by that point. That when his pastoring dream evaporated, uh, he was pretty upset. He was depressed and bitter, and at me for a while, thinking things were my fault. And it was just really hard. It was a
Yeah.
hard time in our family and in our house. And then eventually I said, you know what? I can't do it anymore. I can't stay in this marriage anymore.
Right.
And it was hard, because I still loved him and he
Mm.
still loved me. And he didn't come to religion until he was in his late teens, really, till he was about 18. So he didn't grow up with the same intense indoctrination. So for me, when my faith was dissolving, my identity, everything was dissolving and blowing apart in
Yeah.
my life. And
Yeah.
it wasn't
Yeah.
like that for him. It was like, oh, okay, maybe this thing I believed isn't actually the right thing. But for me, it was every facet of my
Yeah.
life was
Yeah.
impacted by this. It was
Yeah.
really, really difficult. And I went back to school for counseling. So learning about psychology and counseling, and helping other people. And I still had never heard of religious trauma or religious trauma syndrome. I didn't actually know anyone else who had been as fully invested in the faith as I was, and who had walked away.
Yeah. Me
I would
too.
have loved to have had someone that I could
Oh,
talk
yeah.
to,
Yeah.
because it was so profound.
Oh, yeah. I want to
dissolution.
land on that for just a minute,
Yeah.
because this is something I'm going to turn on my light in a minute because I just lost one of my lights. This is something that's really, it bothers me when, like, I've done a bit of speaking. I've been on a few podcasts and that kind of thing. And one of the main things that people say is, "Oh, you just wanted to sin. You just wanted to rebel." And then, or other people will say, well, that basically they don't see how it's a big deal.
It's just
It,
like
it
losing
wasn't
a
really a
belief in
big,
Santa Claus. Yeah, that's what
yeah.
they're saying.
But it's like, it's not just that you wanted to go out and sin, or whatever. It's just so ridiculous to me when I think about how devastated I was and how totally wiped out I was. I mean, I
Mhm.
didn't know who I was, how to live, how to make decisions, what my future was going to be like. I felt almost paralyzed after. I
Mhm.
mean, if Jesus is your whole life, how do you go on when you realize that you don't believe in Jesus anymore? Right. So it's, yeah, I'd like for you to talk about that a little bit, of
Sure.
how, what is the word? Like how basically how deep it can reach somebody.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's your
Yeah,
identity. We used
it's
to have
profound.
we used to have Bible verses that we would write out, and we would confess them all the time of who we are in Christ. And
Yeah.
we were all about how we had to die and it was Christ that lives in us. And
Mhm.
so if your whole identity is in it and then that's gone, you really don't know who you are.
Yes. Yeah. And that, I think, especially for people who are still married to someone who's firmly entrenched in their religious beliefs. And
Mm,
my God, if you add children into the mix there and you're still raising kids,
yeah,
it's very, very problematic.
right.
A lot of marriages um, aren't able to survive either one partner becoming religious or one partner leaving
Yeah,
that religion or
yeah,
losing their faith, because it's such that the worldview seeps into every aspect of your life. It informed what I wore, what I read or
yes,
watched or listened to, who
yep,
with whom I had contact, all my motivations.
yeah, yeah,
I wouldn't befriend unsaved people unless it was with the purpose of proselytizing.
yeah,
It's always that hope is always there. Oh, I'm going to win them for Christ. If I'm just
yeah,
good enough, if I just can manage to do
yeah,
it right and be a good enough witness, which is a huge amount of pressure.
yeah,
Um, so those are very real. And then to have the utter dissolution of your worldview, it's like
yeah, yeah,
if you imagine a skeleton dissolving, there's no place to hang anything after that. There's no, so and I was like, well, how do I know if I believed this for 40 some years of my life? What else am I believing
yeah,
that is not correct? Am I even actually here? Like, are
yeah,
we in a giant computer game? Like, you're
yeah,
extremely vulnerable
yeah,
to everything because you don't know what is real and what is not
yeah.
real.
It's almost like you don't trust your own brain then,
Yes,
because
yes,
I feel like I was deceived for 20 something years. And
yeah.
then
Mhm.
there were times when I've said to myself, like back in the first year or so, well, if I really thought I was right then and I really think I'm right now, how do I know which right was right?
Yep.
you know
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
don't feel that way now because I've examined it a lot more. So
Yes, yes. And it takes a while we need sometimes a bit of space to get from that one place to the next, where we can give ourselves freedom to start researching and educating ourselves, because for a lot of us, that was forbidden. I mean,
exactly.
I wasn't allowed to listen to CBC radio when I was growing up because my dad insisted they were all a bunch of commies. And
BBC
that
radio, for anybody who's American, it's like
Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
definitely not.
It's like NPR, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's yeah, I had lots of rules and restrictions on what I could do. Wasn't allowed to even stay in the classroom, or wasn't supposed to, if evolution was being talked about, or
Yeah.
these sorts of things. And so, of course, also because my religion was taught to me by my parents, and so those are the people on whom my life depended as a child. So when they tell you something and say, this is the truth, you ingest that and you're like, okay, this is the truth, and you erect all kinds of psychological booby traps around that truth to protect it, because that is how your worldview is ordered from then on. And so it's like Wonder Woman, you know, people are shooting at her and she's got her pew pew, she's got her bracelets up, you know, to bounce the bullets back. That's the kind of cognitive dissonance that comes into play when people are trying to maybe show you the truth, present some actual facts that might have you question what your beliefs are. And you're like, nope, cannot do, will not compute, because I must protect my worldview at all costs, because it gives order to my world. It makes me feel safe. If someone dies because they were driving drunk, well, that they were being dangerous. They were, but if an innocent 5-year-old is killed by a drunk driver, that's a lot harder to take, because that is you know, poking a hole in your idea that God is just. So then we wrap that around, but God's ways are higher than our ways.
Yeah.
We don't understand it. We can't possibly understand everything, but you know what? There's a lot we can understand because science. So, but it takes a while to get there. We have to be patient with ourselves. And I really hope people who encounter someone who is deconstructing from their faith, please show compassion to that person. They are in a vulnerable space emotionally, mentally. They are not going to jump from this thing to your, you know, necessarily atheistic or whatever worldview overnight, because they have a lot invested and a lot to unpack emotionally, mentally, psychologically, and we're not on someone else's timetable. We do it on our own timetable. And you know, I felt for a long time like I was in a dinghy on a gray ocean, in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by a dense gray fog, and there was nobody else around. I couldn't see land. I couldn't orient myself. It was extremely disorienting. I did kind of jump into a second adolescence where I was like, well, I deny myself nothing, not a freaking thing, which also can be quite problematic when you have children and teenagers and they're watching you. And it's, you know, like I've talked with my girls about getting therapy, and I've had to be very frank in my apologies to them through the years. Some of the things that I didn't see as problematic, now I'm looking back going, oh my God, I'm so sorry, honey, for the
Janice,
impact that had on you.
That's something that I really, I maybe you can come on another time and we can talk about that specific thing, because that's something else that's very close to my heart. I raised 3 of my kids, you know, pretty much in that fundamentalist home. I didn't deconvert until they were all grown. And so that family dynamic, even though we all love each other and we all want the best for each other and we're communicating, it's still, I mean, I raised them in a friggin' abusive environment. It's abusive, right? And so that's really something. Let's talk about religious trauma syndrome, because this is something that I experienced before I even knew it was a thing. Definitely. So tell us a little bit about what it is and how it impacts people like us.
Sure. It was on part of my deconstruction journey. And I was still searching even for the language. When I would try and Google on the computer, I didn't even know words like deconstruction or religious trauma or anything. And I'm just like, lost my faith, you know, typing that sort of thing. And then eventually, because this is a few years ago now, eventually, I came across Dr. Marlene Winnell, and she's a
Mhm.
psychologist in the United States. And she wrote a book called Leaving the Fold, which is a
Yes.
guide for fundamentalists and others leaving their religions. And I saw some TV interviews with Dr. Winnell, and she had been raised in a missionary family for all of her growing up years. And then she had walked away from the faith, or lost her faith, however people like to
Yeah.
say it.
Yeah.
Um,
I
and
wish there
then
was a better way to, I actually wish there was a better phrase for it, because I don't like any of them.
yeah,
Losing your faith is probably the closest you can get. But
for me it was.
do you feel like you lost something? I don't feel like I lost something, so I don't like putting in a negative
Right.
like that, but it's more like I'd like to be able to go around saying, "Oh, I didn't lose faith. I found reason."
Yeah, that's right. But at the time, it
Yeah.
didn't seem like that. At the
No,
time, it
no.
felt like a tremendous loss, because it was a tremendous loss.
I
So,
found
so
it
I,
was like it was like a grieving. It's like
yep,
somebody
absolutely.
dies, even though that person
Absolutely.
is not real.
Yes, correct,
Yeah.
correct. So I saw Dr. Winnell, and then I was Googling her, and I found that she ran these retreats. She was living in California at the time. And so I reached out to her, and by then I was a therapist, but I didn't have any specialization. I was just helping people through difficult times of crisis in their life, but recognizing still that my background was still impacting me, even as I was, trying frantically to peel off as many layers of that onion as I could. But there still were things that were very hard for me, that weren't hard for, by then I'd moved on, had another partner who wasn't religious at all. And so he didn't have these same issues as me. He was very free. So I reached out to Marlene and attended one of her workshops, or one of her retreats, and read her book, and was able to spend time with her. And so she's the one that actually coined the phrase religious trauma syndrome. And it's not in the DSM, but what it is basically just a collection of symptoms that people often experience when they have been, usually when they've been raised or had spent a long time in a rigid authoritarian fundamentalist religious group. So we have losses as a result of being in that group with all the rules and restrictions put on us. And then we experience more losses when we leave that group. It's a real double whammy, extremely
Yeah.
disorienting. And it can impact us physically in the way that PTSD and complex PTSD, because really religious trauma syndrome has a lot of crossover with complex PTSD, because you're attending services weekly, and if you're living in a home with parents, they're praying every day, they're disciplining you every day. So there's no escape
No.
from these indoctrination tactics, and some of them are extremely harsh.
Yeah.
Yes, so the symptoms can be similar. So some people, your digestion might be off, you might have trouble sleeping, you might have night terrors, nightmares, you might be lethargic, you might be emotionally disconnected and numb from everything, or you might be frantically self-medicating and being involved in, potentially dangerous behaviors, trying to medicate yourself. Huge issues around guilt, shame, and fear, the unholy trifecta, just the
Guilt,
things that
shame, and
stick with
fear.
us.
Yeah.
Yes, from the
Guilt, shame,
religion.
and yeah. Oh,
Hmm.
that sums up so much, Janice. Guilt, shame, and fear. Yeah.
That's
I
right.
I when we're done here, I'm gonna send you a couple of screenshots of a workbook that I used to use when I was a pastor, when I did pastoral counseling.
Oh dear. I'll
Yeah.
try and prepare myself.
It was well, I just recently found it again, because in my angry atheist stage, I burned all of my notes and sermons and stuff, right? But I found this one workbook lying around, and you talk about fear and I mean guilt and shame. basically it's all about how Jesus gave us a victorious life. And if we aren't living that in all areas, then we had better check ourselves out. And so it's a workbook that puts you through 7 steps of repenting for wrong thoughts and wrong
Wow.
words and
Wow.
wrong actions.
So much policing.
Yeah, that was what I did for a couple of decades. It was we were very big on uh, thought control, basically, and thought stopping and replacing it with, replacing what we called negative or bad thoughts or emotions with godly ones, right? So it made us ignore a whole lot of things. Like I suffered depression for years,
Mhm.
um, but you can't be depressed and be have the joy of the Lord at the same time. So, one of it
Yeah.
has to be ignored. So I would just,
Yeah.
I just suffered needlessly.
I'm sorry. And that is so, it almost seems par for the course. And I have to
Yeah.
say, I think Pentecostalism is terrible.
Yeah.
It's really awful. I mean, there are a lot of different fundamentalist groups that are are just terrible, and
Yeah.
Pentecostalism is right up there. It's because
Yeah.
you can never get free. And everything is always your fault. If
Yeah.
it's good, it's from God. If it's bad, it's from
It's
you.
your,
And
yeah.
if your kid gets sick, it's because there's sin in your life, or you're not praying hard enough, or God's chastising you, or God's trying to teach you, or whatever the
Yeah.
ridiculous
Yeah.
mental gymnastics that we
Yeah.
have to do in order to maintain that worldview.
Yeah.
And then there's, when we leave, if we are able to leave, there's so much, as we were saying, guilt, shame, and fear.
Yeah.
So I started interacting with Marlene more. And then also, as I reviewed my own life in ways that my religious upbringing was impacting me, I thought, okay, I'm going to put together a workshop. And because I had also divorced my husband, I decided to call it the Divorcing Religion Workshop. And so it has 6 modules to it. And each one, well, each of the 5, the 6th one is a bonus one, but each of the 5 reflects an aspect of divorce, because it was so, when I lost my faith, that was much harder on me than my divorce. I've been married for 20 years almost, and I really
Yeah.
loved my husband and cared about him. And actually, we are surprisingly good friends. We're in contact every couple of days. We have a very good
Oh,
relationship.
good.
But losing Jesus and losing God and losing that whole worldview was so
Oh,
traumatizing
yeah.
to me. And one of the modules in my Divorcing Religion workshop is completely dedicated to grief. And a lot of people don't know there are different types of grief, and some of them relate fairly closely to the grief that we suffer when we lose our faith. It's there's no body to bury. We don't have a body to bury, but and
Yeah.
yet we feel that we've lost someone. I mean, Jesus was my cosmic big brother, always
Yeah.
on my side, looking
Yeah.
out for me, protecting me from the bullies, giving me powers,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to not have that belief anymore, I felt terrified, vulnerable, open to any manner of attack. Like, because I was coming to the realization that, you know what, life is random and bad things can and do happen.
Yeah.
And what I had was just a belief. It protected me mentally and emotionally, but
Yeah.
certainly did not protect me physically. So,
No.
um, and then there's a type of grief that is not understood or sanctioned by society at large. So this might be,
Mm.
say, if a woman's had an abortion, she's typically not permitted to grieve that. Or if you've been in a long-term extramarital affair and your extramarital affair partner dies, you're
Oh, yeah.
certainly not permitted to grieve
Right.
that. So there are
Right.
things that are socially sanctioned. You're allowed to grieve the loss of your dog because everyone knows dogs are like freaking fantastic. And to lose your
Right.
dog is a horrible thing. So
Yeah.
people can have you show you compassion for that. But to lose this, childish, because that's, if people haven't bought into it, if they never did believe, they think it's as childish as believing in Superman or Santa Claus. They don't understand how
Yeah. It's
profound it
not the
is. And
same.
so we can't phone up our boss and say, well, I won't be in for the next year because I have to mourn the loss of my faith, which was actually my whole life is freaking falling apart.
Yeah.
So there are different aspects and types of grief that I feel like it's important for people to understand. We can't mourn what we don't acknowledge. So it's important to go through and take a look at the losses associated with the loss of our religious belief and
Yeah.
really name those. And I do the workshop in a small group format because group work can be
Yeah.
very supportive. So right now I'm just, I've got 2 more weeks left with the current group I'm working with. There's 6 of them, and they come from all different fundamentals Christian backgrounds. And also there's a person who was a rabbi for many years. So I have people from all different groups. And even though maybe the particular beliefs that they had were somewhat different, the sense of loss is
Yeah.
very, very similar.
Yeah.
And particularly if it also has involved losing a spouse because the spouse is still in the religion, or now they're trying to co-parent with this person who is telling the children that, mommy or daddy's going to hell because they don't believe. Like
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to put that burden on children.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of difficulties that
And
can come along
yeah.
with it.
What have you found to be, with the people that you work with,
Mm.
what are some of the common denominators of, the common struggles, I guess,
Mhm.
of, I other than the loss of your identity. I mean, there's
Mhm.
also a loss of your social circle, I suppose. And
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because church is the one-stop shop for everything. Because you get a little bit of psychology thrown in there.
yeah, that's
You've
right.
got your friendship circle. You're getting some musical interaction. You're
Right.
getting babysitting. If you're in need, there might be a meal train, or
Right.
take up a special offering. The only thing in the secular world that has even come close is military,
Yeah.
military circles, where it's like a brotherhood,
Right.
so to speak. But otherwise, the religion's been around for thousands of years. So it's had a long time to get very perfect at what it does.
Yeah.
So it's hard to replicate on the outside. Yeah, the fear, guilt, and shame is the big one. Um, Depression
Yeah.
is a big deal for a lot of people. I mean, how could it not be
Yeah.
when you've had that so much kind of pulled away? And then anger. A lot of people
Mhm.
go through a stage of being quite angry, and anger is a legitimate part of grief, of the grieving
Yeah.
process. We
Yeah.
just don't want to get stuck there. And
Yeah.
there's a difference between anger that can help propel us towards change, and anger that is like self-immolating, and
Right.
it's not going to do any good. It's just going to consume us and everyone around us. So
Right.
we want to be aware of that. I think particularly in the realm of social media, because it's very easy to connect and resonate with other very, very angry people. So you want to make sure, take a look at any groups that you're involved in, as far as your deconstruction goes. Are you being served? Are you being helped in that by being part of that group,
Yeah. Yeah.
or not?
Yeah.
And also, it's good to realize when we're rebuilding our identity and figuring out who we are, life is very much like a buffet, and you're at this table and there's every kind of food you can imagine. You don't have to eat every food that's on the table. You're going to make yourself sick, and you're allowed to take a bite of everything and then be like, ugh, ugh, nope, don't
Yeah.
want it,
Yeah.
don't want it. And then move on and
Yeah.
try the next thing. And it's can be similar with ideologies. So we enter into a time of exploration and investigation. We're going to research and find things out. What fits? What doesn't fit? And
Yeah.
please, let's try and avoid making grand proclamations. I am now the blah blah. Like let's just like do it in little doses and see how
Yeah.
it fits with
Yeah.
us. And it's also important for people to recognize that while it may be their personal good news that they have come to reason, like you're saying, you entered more into a time of reasoning and science. This is the very worst possible news for your religious parents or
That's
your
right.
religious partner, your spouse, your relatives, whatever. So if and when we do share this news with those close to us, and it's appropriate to share the news because you don't have to live a secret. You don't have to
Right.
keep things secret. You're allowed to be who you are and move through this world autonomously. There's no
Right.
shame in it. But when we share the news, we need to give people appropriate space and time to digest what we have just said. And you're allowed to share your news and apply some boundaries too. You can share the news and say, I'm happy to answer questions about, my process or whatever, but I'm not going to talk about blah, blah, or I'm not
Yeah.
going to be attacked, this sort of thing. You're allowed to set your boundaries. And that's something that Christianity robs people of,
Yeah.
the ability to set boundaries. It's such a cult of confession where it's insisted
Yeah.
that we tell our pastors, we tell our small group, we tell our
Yeah.
parents, you're not allowed to have any thoughts of your own to keep in your head. Well,
Yeah.
guess what? That's part of adulting and being an autonomous person. You are allowed to have your own thoughts and belief systems, and you don't have to share everything. You're allowed to have boundaries.
Yeah. And that is one thing that religion robs from a lot of us anyway. Boundaries. We used to have accountability partners all the time. I mean, if you thought something that was wrong, you should confess it to someone, and so yeah, there was, yeah,
It's crazy. It's crazy making. And now of course I'm on this side of it looking back and I'm just shaking my head like, oh my God, it's hard
yeah,
to believe that ruled my life. And not only did
yeah,
it rule my life, I was very happy in it. I was
yeah,
very secure in it. And I really felt sorry for, Richard Dawkins and those poor atheists. Like I prayed for Spong and, all these other people. Now I'm like, oh, I got to read me some more of their books because
yeah, yeah,
it's so liberating. And that's how I feel now. And that's how I move through my life now, as I feel liberated. I recently hosted the first ever conference on religious trauma. And that just came out of an idea after I'd been to one of Marlene's workshops or conferences, because I've spent time with her there. Oh, her retreats actually is the right word. And I've attended and I've helped facilitate at some. And then afterwards, one time I said, I think we need a conference on this, on religious trauma. And she's like, do you know anything about putting together a conference? Because it's a very big deal. I had no idea. Like, I think I'd only ever been to 2 conferences in my life.
okay, so you
And
learned as you went along, I guess.
I sure did. I sure
Wow.
did. But it ended up being really, really successful. We had well over 300 people who purchased tickets or attended the event. It was online. And now I'm putting together this next year's conference, 2022 conference on religious trauma. And we'll be looking at the role the church played in the cultural genocide of our First Nations people in Canada. I had already decided that before all these horrible things have been coming to light in Canada.
Wow.
They just happen to coincide. And I also want to be looking at the role of adoption, particularly among evangelicals, but all religious people adopting babies with the aim of indoctrinating them,
Yeah.
adoption for indoctrination purposes. So really tackling some pretty big issues. So the conference this year we won't have 22 speakers like we had last year. Good boy, let me tell you, that's a lot. It'll be more like a weekend event, and it'll be probably hybrid, so online and potentially in person in Vancouver. But exploring more issues related to religious trauma.
Yeah, that's fabulous. That is really good work. Like that, what you're doing is really great. For 300 people to be at your first conference, the need is out there. People want to know. So that's fabulous.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Thank you. Because to think that something that was just an idea could give birth to something that benefited so many people. And we had attendees from around the world, from all around the world, from Russia and Australia and Europe and North America. And it allowed me to expand my circle so that I now have contact with people like Yasmin Mohammed, the founder of Free Hearts, Free Minds. And she's an ex-Muslim. And her book is called Unveiled. Fantastic book.
Nice.
So because Muslims, when people leave Islam, of course, they're in danger of losing their life. And these people need a significant help to try and get to safety or figure out how they can navigate, how they can stay alive in their religious society when they no longer believe. So there's all sorts of millions and millions and millions of people around the world who have been victimized by religious trauma, by religion.
And do you think, I kind of have a feeling there'll be more and more, like more people are going to they're going to start coming out of fundamentalism, I think. Because
I call it the rise of the nuns, the rise of the nuns, the people who now claim no religious affiliation.
Yeah. Because it's getting harder and harder in this day and age to do those mental gymnastics and make that shit work, I guess, with the information and stuff that we have available to us now. So
absolutely. And of course, the older people, like my parents' generation, my mom is still a believer, and she doesn't understand my work. And at different times she has expressed not only bewilderment but some hurt, that I have rejected these things. But we maintain a pretty close relationship. She says, I don't understand, but I want to support you. Like she said, should I buy a ticket to your conference, dear? I'm like, absolutely not. Please do not, because she's in her 80s. I don't want her having an existential crisis as she's staring death in the face. I would want her to have fear and angst. And she's wise enough that it's not a topic of our regular conversation. There's lots of other stuff to talk about in life. We don't just have to focus on this one divisive issue.
People got to come to their own conclusions anyway.
It's so true. People have to get there on their own time. People will draw their own conclusions. I am responsible for me. So I'm not going into churches and yanking people out of pews and shaking them. I'm not doing that. Other people might do that. I don't do that. It's more like I'm waiting outside the church doors when someone gets thrown out of the church, when someone stumbles out of the church, and being like, what just happened? Like, I had my faith 1 minute and now who am I? What's going on? That's where I come in, saying, you know what, it's scary right now, but it's going to get better. There is healing and hope and recovery for people who have religious trauma syndrome. And that's where I come in.
Janice, thank you so much. Thank you so much. If somebody, what's your website again? Let's end with plugging your website and your information of how somebody can reach you, because it's very important. I know that I wish I had met you 4 years ago, I must say, when I deconverted myself. So
divorcing-religion.com is my website, and that's where people can find out about my workshop. And I also do have, people can still purchase recordings from the Conference on Religious Trauma. All the video recordings are still available. They can purchase access to those. And so they can reach me through the website. They can also reach me on Twitter. I have 2 different Twitter accounts. First one is at Divorce Religion. And the second one is at wise_counselor, wise counselor. And of course, counselor has 2 L's. It's the Canadian way. So I'm quite active on Twitter, and on Facebook, I'm just under Janice Selbie. Just plain old Janice Selbie.
Wonderful. Thank you, Janice. Thank you so much for coming on.